Well, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is about to address Parliament here in Berlin. He's expected to tell lawmakers that billions of euros in frozen Russian assets must be unlocked to help Ukraine. And is he willing to send German troops as part of a peacekeeping force in Ukraine? We're talking about boots on the ground. We want to go now inside the German parliament and take a listen to the German Chancellor. He is speaking.
To
have an opportunity to look ahead at what we want to achieve moving forward and indeed must achieve. I'm going to sum both up today in a statement on the evening before, on the day before the European Council summit, to say that there's much that needs to be done for Germany and for Europe. But this year, in 2025, together in Germany and in Europe, we have achieved a great deal. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a deep earthquake almost in our security structure. Russia's war against Ukraine continues. We are experiencing a new protectionism which goes against the principles of free trade and open markets, the principles that have been definitive for the prosperity of our country as an exporting nation. What we are experiencing is a stagnating economy, not least due to the backlog of structural reforms. We are seeing a withdrawing to Europe to ensure our own protection as Europe. We find ourselves in a time in which the previous world order is increasingly become a lack of world order. I believe that these global changes are extremely disturbing, and I have said it is a changing era. But perhaps there is a term for what we are experiencing at the moment, or rather, perhaps there isn't. The Karl Schrögel, who won the German Book Prize, described this in his speech accepting his prize. He said it's not just that we've run out of terms to describe things. It is that we no longer have a horizon of experience of these things that are happening here. And everything we've believed is being questioned. Everything is in ruins. This is what writer Karl Schrögel described. And even if we haven't got the terms to describe what's going on, it has to be said that this process of change is very, very real. We experience it. It is tangible. For the German government, I would like to say that we, the German government, and I myself are resolutely certain that Germany must not become a victim of these processes. We cannot stand idly by and watch a reordering of our world. We cannot be a ball played between the superpowers. We want to remain a player responsible for its own interests, deciding resolutely what it wants and where it's headed. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my firm conviction that we can do that. If we make an effort as Germany, as the European Union, if we take on the challenges facing us, then we can tackle these challenges ourselves. It is down to us whether we emerge from this end of an era strong, prosperous, moving forward. We're not just experiencing a role as the German government, but also We are taking a role as a country shaping a new European order as well. And we owe it to ourselves and Europe, colleagues, as the largest country in Europe in terms of population and economic strength. The German government, since this term in office, have focused on three aspects in order to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps as a country. Firstly, Germany is back on the international stage. Ladies and gentlemen, improving our defense capability has contributed to this significantly. We have increased our defense budget significantly, and as I just said in the question and answer session, we've changed the constitution to manage to do this. We have passed some important laws, and we have accelerated procurement and recruiting for the German armed forces, the Bundeswehr. We are pursuing the logic that we must be strong enough to prevent anyone from attacking us. Or to put it another way, we have to have a credible deterrent. And it's working. It works when democracies have better defense capability than autocracies. That's when it works, and it's about this conflict when it comes down to it. Secondly, we have begun to address the structural problems of our economy. We have overcome many obstacles. We have undertaken a number of reforms towards the end of this year to make German trade and industry competitive. We have introduced an investment booster, and we are reducing corporate taxes as well. We are expanding our energy supply. We're introducing an industry power price. We are dropping the grid fees, and the gas levy is being reduced as well. On the cost side of the balance sheet, for companies and for the citizens of this country, this will be really tangible. We are also systematically dismantling red tape, nationally and on a European level. Ladies and gentlemen, with some success, as we see when it comes to the supply chain directive on the EU level and the sustainability reporting directive. These are already initial successes which will ease the bureaucratic burden on companies moving forward. Perhaps you will allow me to refer as well to the cabinet meeting this morning. This morning, we looked at the Infrastructure Act and got that off the ground, hoping that in the next quarter of the next year, it can be passed in a second reading in this Parliament. And the same is true for the new benefit that will be replacing the citizens' income benefit. So these are important acts that we have passed, but it is important, and I want to say this too, next year there are further structural reforms we will have to pass so that our German economy will become more competitive, because we still aren't where we need to be. And from the very first day, we have corrected the course that we've taken in this country in our refugee policy. We have introduced controls on our borders. We have drastically reduced the number of asylum applicants, down by 50% over a prior year. No other country in Europe has reduced its numbers this significantly. I know that you don't like that, because step by step you are losing one of the subjects that you can incite hatred in the German public, but no other country has been able to reduce the number of people applying for political asylum in this country. We've reduced it by 50%, over 50%. This has to do with national policy, even if you don't like that. And as the AfD, you can't use it for your propaganda next year. There are other measures, however, that we've undertaken that are also unfolding their effect. Naturally, in some cases, it will take a while to really feel the result of these reforms. And we haven't come to the end of the reform backlog that we have in the social security systems. There are things we need to change if we want to make our country fit for the future in a new age, an age that has already begun. The CSU, CDU, and SPD will have to work together to achieve this. It is down to us to tackle the problems in our country ourselves. We can solve these problems, and the German government shares the will to do this for Germany. Now, we all know that Germany can only be as strong as Europe is strong. And in many dimensions, we need to work on strengthening Europe. And for a strong Europe, we need a safe Europe, a competitive Europe, and a Europe capable of action. If we manage to achieve all of this, well, all of this will depend on the European Council summit from this evening and tomorrow in Brussels. The security of Europe, ladies and gentlemen, is particularly important. As we have seen, it is intrinsically linked to the fate and security of Ukraine, intrinsically and inseparably linked. Because Russia is waging its brutal war of aggression, not just against Ukraine. We, as Europeans, since this weekend at the very latest, we agree with Ukraine and the USA that we want to achieve a ceasefire as quickly as possible and work towards peace in Ukraine. And we agree that it is only a balanced peace plan that will achieve peace for Ukraine and with it peace for Europe in the long term. In recent days, we have experienced a huge diplomatic momentum pushing towards a peace process. And perhaps you will allow me to say this now, because there have been so many calls for diplomacy rather than arming Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, more diplomacy than we have seen from Berlin in recent days is simply not physically possible. But all of those who believe that diplomacy is the only way to stop this war, let me remind you what President Putin said in response to my request to stop the weapons over Christmas. His response to my request is something that you cannot top in terms of cynicism and brutality. We are therefore coordinating closely with our European partners in the path forward, but also with our U.S. partners. And that's why on Monday, the Ukrainian president and other allies from Europe and the U.S. were here in Berlin as our guests. And the message that came out of our conference in Berlin was clear. On the one hand, long-term peace cannot be reached at the cost of Ukraine or at the price of peace in Europe. Ukraine cannot have to cede territory if it doesn't want to. And in the future, Ukraine must be able to protect itself against future attacks from Russia. For that, they need a strong defense force themselves, and they need robust and credible security guarantees from our partners. And on Sunday and on Monday, we made real progress towards a ceasefire. We know the price of war, ladies and gentlemen, and now we are talking about the price of peace. And, colleagues, this price of peace means that Germany, together with its allies, must commit for security guarantees for Ukraine after a ceasefire. The specific contribution is something we will have to discuss once the diplomatic process that has begun not just continues over the next few weeks, but actually leads to a peace process. And the war and the way it ends will be significant for what happens in the European political structure itself. Now, we see that Russia has its sights on countries outside of Ukraine towards Europe. Already there are hybrid attacks on our countries every day, with drones flying over, with more threats of murder, cyber attacks, and targeted disinformation to people in this parliament, among others. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the Ukrainians are not just fighting for their own liberty, they are fighting for our freedom in Europe as well. And in these days running up for Christmas, I want to thank them. And looking around in this parliament, and the applause shows us who is supporting Ukraine and who is not. All you have to do is look around and see who's clapping and who isn't. The situation that I have described now is the situation in which the European Council summit is going to be held. It will have to make major decisions. It will have to decide whether we, as the European Union, will use the Russian sovereign assets that have been frozen and will now stay frozen indefinitely for the security in Ukraine. At the end of the day, it's about European security as well. The European Commission worked intensely last week to come up with specific proposals as to how Ukraine can be supported in the years to come. And we're talking about up to 90 billion euros in terms of financial support. But it's about two things here. It's about helping Ukraine, but it's also about sending a clear signal to Russia that the sovereign assets frozen in Europe will be used to contribute to ending this war as quickly as possible. It's about making it clear to Russia that continuing this war of aggression is pointless. Using these assets would make it possible for the Ukrainian army to continue to fight for another 2 years. Let me say that in no uncertain terms here. We are not taking this step to extend the length of the war. We want to end the war as quickly as possible by taking this step. Now, I know many member states in the European Union have their concerns. The Belgian government particularly has its worries because much of the immobilized Russian sovereign assets are in Belgium. And this is why we are debating all of these issues in order to ease these concerns. The proposal of the Commission, I believe, dovetails perfectly with international law and with our international commitments. Perhaps I can say it even more clearly. It's not enough just to use sanctions in order to dry out the financing for the Russian war machinery. It's also not enough that we continue to support Ukraine the way we have. It's not enough if we throw our entire political weight into these peace negotiations. We're doing all of this without any doubt. But to be perfectly honest, the pressure on Putin would seem to have to be even stronger in order to push him towards serious negotiations. And that, colleagues, that is why we need a decision by the European heads of state and government, and I will be pushing for this decision in Brussels this evening myself. And when it comes to European defense, we will have to join forces more. We'll have to come up with military systems that we develop together, produce and procure, adhering to clear standards with simple structures and with far more in number. Ladies and gentlemen, all of this will strengthen the European Union, and it will strengthen the European pillar of NATO, and that is necessary because what is true for Germany is also true for the EU and for NATO. And I'm happy to repeat that sentence whenever you want to hear it. We want to be able to defend ourselves so that we don't have to defend ourselves. This is true for Germany, and it's true for Europe and for NATO. Now, in recent days that have been so difficult, there are some good news. 2 years after the Hamas terrorist attack on the 7th of October, thanks to President Trump's intervention, we have a ceasefire in Gaza. There are setbacks, but the war would appear to be over. Long-term peace seems within reach. The last hostages, including German citizens, touched us and made us very happy and caused me to want to meet these hostages in Jerusalem. Now, it must be possible that we achieve the second phase of the peace plan now. When I was visiting in Israel, I discussed this with Prime Minister Netanyahu. For we need a long-term ceasefire. Hamas must be disarmed, and there needs to be a government and security process set up in Gaza without Hamas involvement. Germany will help here in diplomatic terms. We will help in terms of humanitarian aid, and we will help in the rebuilding of Gaza. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe's place in this new world will depend very much on our economic power. The competitiveness of the European companies is the second dimension in which we need a new level of European strength. Until recently, the export-oriented economic model of our country was a model of success for many countries in the European Union, particularly for us. It was built on a rules-based access to markets, resources, technologies, and capital. But this model, colleagues, is facing more and more restrictions and challenges, not least through U.S. tariffs and Chinese export limitations, particularly for semiconductors and critical resources. We must engage with this new reality, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're working together with our European partners and the European Commission to come up with an economic security strategy to ensure access to critical raw materials and to strengthen global supply chains. The National Security Council that I just talked about has commissioned our economics ministry to come up with a plan of action to systematically reduce strategic dependencies on critical raw materials. And this is important, colleagues, for many industries in Germany, for the automotive industry, the electrical industry, the mechanical engineering industry, and others. I am pushing for expanding our trade relations and to find partners across the globe who are interested in free trade. I will be intensely advocating this evening that the President of the European Commission and the President of the European Council next Friday sign the Mercosur agreement and are able to do so. Colleagues, the ability to act of the European Union is measured on whether, after 26 years of negotiations, we are finally able to sign this trade agreement and to ensure that the trade agreements with Mexico and Indonesia can get off the ground as quickly as possible. The situation we find ourselves in now, the times we are living in now, are not ones where we can just nitpick about enormous trade agreements with enormous areas in the world that we want to conclude as Europeans. That is the priority. And anyone who argues differently hasn't understood the priorities facing us at this moment. We are going to strengthen the EU single market with this trade agreement. We have two documents. The report by Enrico Letta, the former Italian Prime Minister, about increasing the scope of the single market, and Mario Draghi's report on competitiveness in Europe. These two documents are a double wake-up call for Europe and the state of EU competitiveness. They contain strategies, very specific proposals as to how we can proceed. And this is why I have written a letter and sent it to 21 member states, heads of member states who have now signed it. We wrote it to the European Council, and we have a special meeting on competitiveness and the reduction of bureaucracy. And on the 12th of February next year, this meeting will be held. We must make progress, and we must make it quickly. In Europe, we need structural reforms. If we act successfully now, then a new dynamism of growth can be triggered, and this changing time can be turned into an opportunity. And then we need to be a Europe that can act. Our responses to the geopolitical changes are ones that need to be reflected in the multi-annual financial framework 2028 to 35, the MFF. We must set the right signals here. And let me say that we cannot just continue with business as usual. This European Union is facing two major strategic challenges. Our defense capability must be increased, and our competitiveness of our trade and industry must be increased. These are two priorities which are the strategic response to the challenges we are facing in the world today. I want us to tackle these together in our coalition, but also in the European Union. This is the opportunity to make the European Union what we've always wanted, an open, free trade, a single market in which people can live in liberty and democracy. We must set priorities now and ensure that Europe is competitive and has defense capabilities once again. Thank you very much.
Okay, you've been listening there to the German Chancellor speaking to the German Parliament. I want to go now to our chief political editor, Michaela Kuffner. She has been following that speech for us. Michaela, let's talk about the money aspect, about what the German Chancellor just said when he said that the previous global order is now global disorder. He's looking at Ukraine. There has to be a plan to make sure that Ukraine can survive the near term and long term. And he says that will be decided beginning tomorrow at an EU summit with that the frozen Russian assets. Tell me, why is the decision on how to use that money, those funds, why is that such a make or break decision for Europe as well as for Germany?
Because Europe is at pains to demonstrate, and it was so also during these negotiations over Ukraine that took place here in Berlin, together with Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Donald Trump, Volodymyr Zelensky and the other Europeans. Europe needs to demonstrate that it actually has it in it to act, to be a player, now that it has a seat at the table of these negotiations. And the Europeans, they may not be running out of patience over Ukraine like many allies, but they are running out of money fast. There are high levels of debt in many European countries, also including France and Italy, and there is simply no appetite to have to finance Ukraine in the future. And this is why those 200 billion in Russian frozen assets are the way out here. And as Friedrich Merz said, it's not enough to support Ukraine to bolster defense. What needs to happen is that Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, needs to be put under additional pressure. And that's also what this package would do, because many experts are saying this war won't be won militarily or through negotiations necessarily. It needs to be Vladimir Putin's economy, the Russian economy, running out of breath, him seeing that there's no more to gain in continuing the fighting.
And Michaela, the Chancellor said that he is going to begin as early as this evening lobbying for the European Council, the European Union, to make this decision to use these frozen assets to keep Ukraine alive. What are you hearing from your sources? What are the chances that the Chancellor's lobbying efforts are going to be successful? What are the chances that you're going to see a decision tomorrow or Friday in favor of using those frozen assets for Ukraine?
Well, I'll first tell you what Friedrich Merz told ZDF public broadcaster here in Germany last night. He said the chances were 50-50. This is the lower end of expectations. I believe that these are also tactics used by Friedrich Merz to really up the ante, to increase pressure on Europeans to demonstrate unity. The Italians, Meloni, the prime minister there, kept speaking of an alternative option. Well, as far as Germany is concerned, there is no alternative but to decide this, because this is the way to secure funding for Ukraine and to demonstrate to Russia that the Europeans won't be running out of breath and running out of money. But then there are the likes of Viktor Orban of Hungary, the Hungarian prime minister, who's seen as pretty much a political dead loss on this issue. They need a majority, and that's why this will come down to the wire behind the scenes. One thing is for sure: if the Europeans cannot demonstrate unity on this, they will no longer be taken seriously by Russia, and more importantly, risk no longer being taken seriously by the United States, who they depend on for security and in large parts on trade.
And Michaela, the Chancellor said that Ukraine needs security guarantees. He said that's the price of peace for Germany as well. Germany must commit to being part of that peace guarantee. What's he saying there? Is he preparing people here in Germany for possible boots on the ground at some point, German soldiers in Ukraine to keep the peace?
Well, over the past 48 hours, I've watched the German Chancellor commit, and he did recommit here, to the security of Ukraine being European security, that the Germans will have to play their part. He signed off on the document signed by the Europeans, by the coalition of the willing, laying down for the first time in writing the will to have a European force on the ground. What he's ducking away from, and he did just before he held this speech in Chancellor's question time here, when he was posed with a yes or no question by the far-right AfD, whether there would be German soldiers sent. He said, look, it's not that easy. It's not a yes or no question. And this is all conditional of there actually being some kind of agreement with Russia. Let me just translate that for you. Yes. He is committing that Germany would send troops. That's what I'm reading into what he's publicly said so far. But he does not want a public debate at this moment in time, fearing more division, as Germany and the Europeans need to demonstrate to the US that they can unite behind this.
Michaela, we've got about a minute and a half left. I just want to ask you, we heard the Chancellor say Germany is back. You and I have spoken many times about the criticism that Germany is an economic powerhouse, but when it comes to military diplomacy, it punches below its weight. Is that changing now? I mean, was this speech that we just heard from the Chancellor, is he letting the world, letting Europe know that you're looking at a power that sees itself as a power?
He made that clear that he also sees a German leadership role. He quite openly said, and that's a bit surprising for a German chancellor, that democracies need to be armed up better than totalitarian states. And he can claim for himself that he is the European leader who did get Donald Trump on the phone eventually, I hasten to add, when that 28-point plan that so shocked the Europeans came out from the US side, that many feel was dictated by Russia, and that he successfully made Berlin the hub for the most meaningful negotiations so far over Ukraine, including the United States and many Europeans, also NATO. So yes, he's demonstrating that he has the clout. Now he needs the Europeans to give him the mandate and the legroom by releasing those 200 billion euro in frozen Russian assets.
Yeah, it's going to be quite an interesting next 48 hours to see what comes out of that meeting beginning tomorrow. Michaela Kuffner at the German Parliament. Michaela, thank you. You're watching DW News. I'll be back at the top of the hour with more world news. Our coverage continues. Stick around. We'll be right back.